going to talk about the fact that I've already tried to film this video. Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookish Realm, and I am back with another video. Today, as you can see by the title, I am here to do my July mid-month wrap up. It is so good to be through the middle of July. We're getting closer to the year ending, which I think I can say for a lot of people that is such a good thing. Here's to hoping that 2021 is nowhere near as bad as 2020. All right, so as with all of my mid-month wrap-ups, you all know that I do not do stats with these videos. I keep those for the end of the month. I did read, I believe, 16 books so far this month. I had one that I finished that I did not mark as read on Goodreads yet. By the time that this video goes up, I will have posted my review to Goodreads, and I have another one that I may finish before this video goes up as well, but it won't be on this video because technically I'm not finished with it yet. The first book that I read this month was Genesis Begins Again by Alicia D. Williams. I actually have done a full review on this book, so I'm not going to speak on it too much or too long. And I'm going to interject here and say I apologize if I sound nasally. I am super congested. I'm actually pretty sick at the time of filming this video, so bear with me if I vocally sound just a little different. Genesis Begins Again is about the experiences of Genesis as a dark-skinned girl. It covers topics like colorism and texturism, and it speaks to the journey that Genesis goes on in trying to become more comfortable in the skin that she's in. This book definitely has trigger warnings for alcoholism, emotional abuse, mental abuse, colorism, and texturism. It also speaks highly to the internalized racism that sometimes is present in the Black community. Of course, you guys know that like I said, I've done a full in-depth review of this and absolutely loved it. It's not an easy read. I had to pause and take breaks in reading it, but I really appreciated the discussion that Alicia had in it, and I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Right Swipe by Alicia Rye, and this is about two characters, Rhiannon and Samson, and Rhiannon has developed her own dating app, and we find out in the beginning of the novel that Samson and Rhiannon had a relationship prior to the opening of this book. It was a one-night stand, but then they ended up enjoying each other's company so much that they wanted to see each other again, and Samson ends up standing up Rhi, and she gets so upset because he doesn't communicate anything with her. She feels like he just ghosted her, when there's actually more to the story. I ended up giving this one a high rating, not because of the romance between the two characters. I actually felt like they had little to no chemistry. A lot of the things that they did felt more like a friendship than a romantic relationship. I think they worked well together, but I just didn't feel that spark and that fire. But what I did love about this novel is the social issues that Alicia Rye does tackle in understanding and examining how Rhiannon became a CEO of her own big tech company. As a woman of color, it is definitely a different experience being in a huge technical world or owning your own business, and I feel like Alicia Rye does a great job in talking to those experiences. She also talks a little bit about workplace harassment, and she does it in such a tactful way that I can tell that she did her research. And I truly believe that these social issues, these two big social issues, are the reason why this book was so enjoyable for me, because I love reading romance now. I'm so happy that I've been getting into reading more romance, but I love romance books that also focus on other issues outside of the romance. And I don't know if this novel would have been successful in tackling the concept of a woman of color being the lead in a tech industry without really discussing the issues that come with it. So I'm glad that Alicia Rye felt the need to incorporate all of this into this book, because it made it a well-rounded and more successful book. I think had that not been discussed, I probably would have given it more like a 3 stars, but because it was, I gave it 4 stars. And The Right Swipe also fulfilled the prompt for the pop culture readathon of Billboard Dad, in which we were required to read a book about matchmaking. The next 3 things that I ended up reading also were part of the pop culture readathon, and this fulfilled the prompt of Dr. Dolittle, which was to read a book about a character with special powers. And for this prompt, I read the first 3 issues of BB Free by Gabby Rivera, and I absolutely love this comic book series. I don't know how many people have actually read it, but it is about a character by the name of BB Free, and BB lives in this alternate version of the United States, which has been impacted by a great disease, like ravaged. A great part of the population has been killed by this disease. And it's weird because the geography of the United States has actually changed as well. Florida is no longer like a complete state. It is actually broken up into different sections. And now when all the kids in this world turn 15, they get to do something sort of like a freedom tour where they get to figure out what they want to do with their lives. They learn more about themselves. They learn more about the world that they're living in. And BB is determined to go on her freedom tour, but her father is quite overbearing. He suffocates her creativity. He doesn't want her to explore anything about the world. He wants to keep her right there locked down in their town, and they have this continuous rift between the two of them. Now, I won't go into any discussion about the second and third issues, but in the first issues we really get this buildup of a story of BB making the decision that regardless of her father's approval or not, she's going to go on this tour. She runs this radio show with her best friend, and she's learning more about herself. I think in the very beginning there were some discussions about BB possibly being non-binary. I don't know if this is going to be explained or covered in the later issues, but I know that it is something that is touched upon. When BB and her father end up getting into a altercation, she figures out that she has these special abilities. We don't know what these special abilities are. We don't know what it means. We do know that her father works for this organization that may be keeping these powers in check. There's some weird things going on with her dad, and of course, you know, with comic books it takes a while to build up to what the actual plot of the story is. A lot of the first issues are usually laid for character development and introducing the reader to the art style and the coloring and line drawing, so we still have a lot more to go in terms of plot and world building, but so far I have really enjoyed them, and I gave all 3 issues 4 stars. The next book that I read was also for the Pop Culture Readathon, and this fulfilled the prompt for Sandlot, where we were supposed to read a book that involved sports, and for this I read Avantgardes Volume 2, written by Carly Uston. I won't go into the specifics of this volume because it is Volume 2, but Avantgardes is essentially about a misfit group of students at this university who want to play on this basketball team, and they all have a different range of capabilities. Some are really, really good, some are really, really bad, and it almost feels a little like slice of life where we're just following different aspects of their lives and how they interact with each other as a team and what their ambitions and dreams and goals are. I absolutely love Avantgardes. I love that this volume in particular explores the perspectives of each one of the team members. So while the first issue was definitely, or first volume was definitely a exploration of Charlie's experience coming to the university, I really do feel like I enjoyed this second volume a lot more because I got to see from the perspective of so many different characters who had so many different thoughts and feelings. There is great representation in these books as far as just race, ethnicity, as well as sexuality and gender identity. I'm slightly disappointed that I actually read this comic book series so quickly, volumes 1 and volume 2 this year, because now I have to wait for volume 3 to come out, and I don't know if I'm gonna be patient enough. I may go through and actually just start reading the single issues, and I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars. The next one that I read was A Silent Voice by Yoshitoki Oma, and this is one that I'm reading for a project, so I won't really go into a review for it. Just know that this is a story about Shoya and Shoko, and Shoya is our male lead, and he is a complete jerk. He picks on Shoko, who is actually deaf, and terrorizes her, and this book is just basically about that experience and about both of the characters. This is only a 6-volume series. I was blessed enough to receive the 7 volumes, excuse me, in 7 volumes, but I was blessed enough to receive all 7 volumes as a box set, as a gift. So I definitely will be binging this. As I said before, this is for a special project, so I'll be talking about the characters and the plot in more depth in that project, but I did end up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished was Manana Land by Pam Munoz Ryan, and this is a story about a young boy by the name of Max who lives with his dad and his grandfather, and Max is really obsessed with football, and not football as in like, because I know that I have a lot of US followers, so not American football, but soccer. So he's really interested in that, and you see him kind of develop this interest in playing for the village team and possibly going pro one day. And there are some new regulations and guidelines that do come down when it's time for the training season, and he has to have a copy of his birth certificate, and he reaches out to his father to let him know that in order to play he needs a copy of his birth certificate, and his father states that they don't have one. And in the background you also have this knowledge of the fact that Max's mother is nowhere around, and Max kind of talks about that in the beginning. But what's so interesting about this novel is that it feels like it's 2 storylines in the beginning. It feels like there's this conversation going on about Max's mother, and then there's this conversation about like his obsession with football and how he wants to possibly become a pro and how his family has experience in playing the sport. But what you find out is that the 2 stories actually link together, and it becomes this huge conversation about immigration. I loved this book so much. I feel like it was so well done. So this book clearly takes place in a fantasy world. Max and his family live in Santa Maria, and Max finds out about these people who are considered guardians who bring the hidden ones from Abismo into Santa Maria, and he finds out that his family may have had or may not have had something to do with that, and it all ties back to his mother. And like I said, even though it takes place in a fantasy world, I found it very telling that this is clearly aligned with some of the immigration stuff that we have going on here in the United States. The hidden ones from Abismo are often characterized as criminals and thieves and these awful people who are trying to cross into the borders of Santa Maria, and people don't want them there. People feel like they're just going to bring trouble, and that is a huge conversation that has been going on here in the United States. Ryan does an excellent job of humanizing the characters of these individuals that are considered the hidden ones. A lot of these individuals are trying to escape from Abismo into Santa Maria because of the fact that they have been abused mentally, emotionally, physically. They are in danger. They are attempting to reunite with family, and it makes me really think about our perceptions of undocumented immigrants and how the narrative has been so negative towards undocumented immigrants without knowing the reasons why. And I think that Ryan does a wonderful job. While I wasn't surprised about any of the things that were discussed in this book, it did not touch my heart any less than what it would have had I not had the knowledge. It just was fantastic. It was just such a great middle grade novel. I highly recommend it. I listened to this as a advanced listening copy from Libro FM, and I would recommend listening to it on audio. There are some musical scenes that are in the book that the narrator actually does sing, and it's like full songs, and I really enjoyed it. Ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't give it a full 5 stars because the pacing of it was off a little bit. I feel like it was really slow, and then all of a sudden everything kind of rushed towards the end, but I really did enjoy it, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read, which is a fan favorite, is You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson, and this is set against the backdrop of a high school where our main character Liz has gotten into her dream school where she's going to play in the orchestra, but she has to wait to see if some financial aid is going to come through. And when it doesn't come through, what ends up happening is that she is pushed into a position in order to run for homecoming queen, because If you win Homecoming Queen, then a scholarship is attached to it. Homecoming King and Queen. So I thought that this definitely was going to be like an enemies to lover type of romance, and it definitely wasn't. It wasn't enemies to lovers. It was just a cute contemporary romance, and I like that Leah Johnson tackled a lot of things. There was an off-the-page death, specifically with a certain illness that I don't want to specify, that happens, and you actually see Liz go through the process of healing and dealing with that illness, and I really appreciated that because I read A Blaze So Black last month, and one of the things I didn't like about that book was that our main character Alice didn't really get to go through the grieving process with her father. But in this book, Liz actually does go through a grieving process, and she deals and actively talks about why it hurt so much and how much she struggles with the death of that family member. So I really appreciate that aspect. I also think that Leah Johnson handled the whole conversation about being Black and queer very well. I think that is becoming a very popular narrative in some of these books, and I'm happy that it is, because growing up as a Black woman, I did not have access to a lot of resources or see a lot of characters that identify as Black and queer, specifically Black queer women, and this is that book. This is that book where we get to see a happy Black queer woman. And a lot of times I feel like people unknowingly forget that Black women can be queer. I don't know why that is or what that is, but it seems like it's not something that's quite talked about a lot, but we can be queer. So I found that this book really touched on that very well. And Leah also even addresses like being a Black person at a predominantly white school. And while these things weren't aggressively discussed in this book, I don't want to say, maybe aggressively is not the right word. These things weren't really at like the forefront of the book at all times. I feel like they were greatly incorporated and weaved into the story in a very subtle way that I did appreciate. I really also appreciated that this book didn't have a perfect ending. Not that it wasn't a happy ending, but it wasn't an ending where like a bow was tied and everything was just perfect. I think that it was an ending filled with hope, and I think it was an ending that really showed how we could address some issues that teens are facing in high schools now. Like, so this book takes place in Indiana, and when they go to prom, what ends up happening is that they are very strict about how people must go to prom. There's no room for those who may be trans or may be gender fluid, or those who may just not want they just may not want to go dress that way. And I think that this is a serious issue that is still faced in certain high schools, especially high schools that are more conservative. Like, that's a reality, and I love that Liz just pushed back against all of that. I could not give it 5 stars. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. I couldn't give it 5 stars because there was a rift between Liz and another character that I don't think was handled well. I feel like this person got saving grace when I don't think that they should have gotten it that quickly, because they did some serious damage to Liz, and not just like, I hurt your feelings. It was, you made me question my whole identity type of problem. And for me, that is such a huge issue that I couldn't just glaze over that and say, oh, okay, well, she apologized. I think some more conversations and some more healing needed to take place in that relationship than just discussion. And someone makes you question your whole identity, there's a lot of damage that is happening in that conversation that just can't be overlooked. But overall, I thought it was fantastic. I enjoyed it. I am happy that I have listened to this book. It was beautifully done, and I think everybody should read it. The next book that I read was Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson, and I'm just going to go ahead and start this by saying that I believe that Jacqueline Woodson can do no wrong. She can do nothing wrong whatsoever. This book is relatively short. I don't even think this book caps in at 200 pages. If I'm pretty sure it doesn't clock in at 200 pages. But this is a family saga type of story, or intergenerational story, where it begins with this conversation of why Melody, who is the daughter of Iris, is having a coming out party, and she's wearing a dress that was initially made for her mother, and her mother never gets the opportunity to wear it. And you see this rift and these hard conversations that are happening between mother and daughter within the first few pages. And what Jacqueline Woodson allows you to see is the events that cause the rift between mother and daughter, and how decisions of those that come before you impact you in ways that you may not even see or be aware of. So this book is told in multiple perspectives. It's Melody's, it's Iris, and that's the mother and daughter duo. There's perspectives from Iris's mother and father and from Melody's father. And looking at these 5 individuals, you learn so much about their varied experiences and how it has changed them and changed the people around them. Even within the context of looking at this family, Jacqueline Woodson even forces us to see the effects of racism and gentrification and how Black and brown people are treated in this world. And I just couldn't get over the fact that all of this was covered so well in such a short novel, when I have seen books that are 2-3 times longer than this one attempt to incorporate and illustrate the issues that families have, and we're not able to successfully do it in a longer length. I think that there is a huge question and a huge discussion on motherhood, romantic relationships, how a lot of events from our past determine how we are in the future and how we end up raising those who come after us. It was just really, really great, y'all. I have not read a book like this ever, and this is a book that you read more than once. I read this book and I think that I need to pick it up again before the year ends, because I know that I missed stuff. This is that novel that you have to sit down and read or listen to slowly, line by line, because there's so much that Jacqueline Woodson is able to capture in such a short period of time. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I just, oh my gosh, I loved it. And I ended up giving it 4.5 stars, which I'm not even sure why I gave it 4.5 stars now that I think about it. I may go back and change my rating, because the more I think about it, the more I realize how brilliant it was. And I think it's genuinely a 5-star read. The next book that I ended up reading was Out of My Mind by Sharon Draper. And Out of My Mind is a book about a character by the name of Melody who has cerebral palsy. And Melody cannot walk, and she's also nonverbal, but everything is told from her perspective and her experiences of feeling like she's trapped in this body, and that she is an intelligent child, but no one knows how intelligent she is because she can't communicate like everybody else. So we watch her in a variety of experiences, and we see how adults and other kids treat her. And y'all, oh my gosh, it was so hard to read some parts of this book, because you see everything from her perspective, and you see how people treat her, from the doctor who said she was so mentally incapacitated that she should be sent to a home, from the teachers who could not believe that she was as smart as she was, and even the way sometimes that Melody's parents treated her. It was just amazing to see that nobody in this book was perfect at all. Nobody treated Melody the way that she should have been treated, because of the fact that she was nonverbal and just could not communicate the way that everybody else could communicate, and everybody treated her differently. I think this book really speaks to the fact that we all have biases and thoughts and feelings about individuals who may be nonverbal, and it's a bias that we all need to check, because everyone in this book had a bias and had thoughts and feelings about Melody being nonverbal, and these assumptions, when Melody was no different than anyone else. She just couldn't communicate the way that the rest of us communicate with each other. I thought that Sharon Draper handled this in a very tasteful and respectful way. I think that this is definitely a book for individuals who feel like middle grade is not hard-hitting, who feel like middle grade is just simplistic, who feel like middle grade can't be as good as YA or adult books. You need to pick up this book, because it will prove you completely wrong. I only ended up giving it 4 stars because it is quite dated in the writing style. I feel like some of the language that was used, not like language specifically about Melody, but just social language between characters, was a little outdated. So I couldn't give it a full 5 stars, but other than that, I really enjoyed it. And of course, you guys know that I love Sharon Draper, so I'm itching to pick up her newest book that I talked about in my library book haul. The next book that I read was Mall Unbound by Aisha Saeed, and this was read for F-a-thon as well. This fulfills the prompt of F theological fundamentalism, and it is a book that we read that has a character with a different religion than us, so I decided to pick this up. Mall Unbound is about a character by the name of Amal, who is an excellent student. She wants to become a teacher, and it's set against the backdrop of Pakistan, where we learn about a lot of discriminatory practices that are faced by women and girls. And although Saeed doesn't go a lot into it, she does use it as a backdrop, so you do get that knowledge and idea of what those experiences are like. Amal is just super focused on school and her love of reading until her mother gives birth, and she is stuck at home taking care of the household, and then some other events end up happening and she gets sent to live at the Khan household as their servant. So this definitely does talk a little bit about child labor and what happens in these small communities when you have people who essentially serve as loan sharks, who put these individuals into greater debt, and then they end up having to sell their children into servitude to fulfill that debt. And I think that it does an excellent job covering that. I think the only issue that I had with this book is that it's a bit idealistic, and I understand why it's idealistic, because it is a middle grade novel. You don't want to go into too much of the hardcore aspects of certain topics because you want to write for your audience, so I definitely got that. But I do feel like the way that this ended was a bit too ideal, and that in reality I don't think that it would have necessarily played out the way that it played out. And I know a lot of reviewers kind of feel the same way that I feel, is that you understand that it's written to a certain audience, but it's kind of hard to also ignore that ending because you know that probably in reality it wouldn't have worked out that way, and that there could have been a way to handle the topic in a more realistic way without taking away from reality. But I really did enjoy it. I thought it was well written. I love Amal's character. She's so full of hope and love and courage, and I really appreciated seeing that. And as I always say, this cover is beautiful. It's such a beautiful cover and a beautiful story, and giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next 2 books I read are for the project that I'm currently working on. By now y'all should be able to guess what the project is if you watch my June wrap up and I talk about one book and I said I can't really say anything about it because it's part of a project. You'll start to see the theme. The first one that I read was Sookie and the Mermaid by Robert Deason Sochi and Brian Pickney. I am not going to, like I said, say anything about this. I gave it 4 stars. I talk about it more in that project that will be coming out next week. And then after that, I read Bayou Magic by Jewel Parker Rhodes, which I ended up giving 4.5 stars to. I really enjoyed this book. As you can see, I really enjoyed this book. Can't wait for you guys to see my actual thoughts about it. And the last thing that I read so far this month is The Voting Booth by Brandon Colbert, which definitely is a great YA contemporary book. I don't read a lot of YA contemporary, but I read this one and I'm so glad that I did. It is one of those books that takes place over the course of a day, which I'm always kind of weary of, but believe me when I tell you that this was done very well. And it is the course of an election day. It talks about 2 characters, Marva and Duke, who come from 2 different perspectives of what the election process means. Marva is very engaged in politics. It's something that she absolutely loves. She's very adamant about standing up for issues that she believes in, standing up for the Black community, and making sure that people are using their right to use their voice. And I found her just to be such a relatable character. She was just 100% real, and I love that about her. And then you have Duke, who understands the importance of voting, but he's not as passionate as Marva, and his experience of why voting is so important. I think it's a little bit more traumatic than Marva's experience is, but these two come together at an election station where Duke is attempting to vote and then he can't vote. And then Marva's like, you're gonna vote before the day is over with. So of course they go on this huge adventure trying to make sure that Duke is able to get to the polls and vote the way that he's supposed to be able to vote. And then there's so many different things that are talked about in this, from police brutality to the Black experience, especially with Duke being biracial and Marva going to a predominantly white school. There's this conversation of being Black enough and what does it mean to be considered Black enough and how they've dealt with those experiences. There are conversations about familial expectations, about interracial dating. There's so much covered, and I love that she did, and when I say she, Brady Colbert did flashbacks in this novel, because then we get to learn more about our two main characters and their families through these flashbacks, instead of it just being us trying to figure out who they are and what their families are like over the course of this one day. I really appreciated this incorporation of timing. Another thing that I really did like, of course, there's this assumption that these two characters are going to get feelings for each other, but it was very subtle. It was done in a very respectful way. At the beginning of the novel, Marva does have a boyfriend, but you can tell from the beginning, this is not a spoiler, that relationship is doomed from the beginning. But what I did like is that Colbert took her time with each character, and they never denied the fact that Marva did have a boyfriend. Of course, nothing happens until that relationship is seemingly over with. There is no cheating. But even then, it was still done so tactfully, and I don't think the romance was overbearing or took away from the social issues that were tackled in this contemporary book. As you can see, I really enjoyed it. I think it is a very timely book considering we are in an election year, and I know that when the election happened in 2016, a lot of groups did not have as many people going to the polls as they did in 2008 and 2012. And I think this book is a good testament as to why it is so important for those of us who are in the United States to exercise our right to vote, especially this year in an election year, because it does change stuff. And a lot of those topics are discussed in this book. A lot of those topics are made very glaringly important in this book. So if you have not picked up the voting booth, I think you should pick it up, especially since this is an election year, and really learn more about the relationship between voting and Black people, the Black community. Very, very interesting conversation. I did end up giving this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. The last book that I technically have actually read for the midway mark in July is Pride by Evie Zaboy. And this is a remix Pride and Prejudice book that I read for the F-a-thon that fulfills the F gentrification prompt, and it takes place in Brooklyn, and it's about these two characters, Zuri and Darius Darcy. Zuri clearly has, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 other sisters, so there's 5 of them. Of course, I had to think, how many Bennett sisters are there? There's 5. So there's 5 in Zuri's family, and what ends up happening is Darius and the Darcy family move across the street, and it basically kind of covers their relationship. When you think Pride and Prejudice, this very much so follows that storyline, but this is going to be an unpopular opinion, okay? I like this book, but I feel like Evie Zaboy wrote it in a very strange way, okay? I feel like there are 2 storylines in this book. One where she's trying very, very hard to follow the same storyline as Pride and Prejudice, and another storyline where she's kind of developing her own characters. It's very weird, and I don't know how to describe it. I think someone else has had the same feelings where it's supposed to be a retelling, but it's just weird the way that it's done. I feel like characters were pushed into this Pride and Prejudice narrative, and then in some aspects they were pulled out of that narrative to kind of define them as their own characters outside of Pride and Prejudice. It was just really, really weird, and I had trouble with that. I really had trouble with that writing style, and I don't know if I liked it. You are seeing me kind of work out right now my real-time feelings of it, because I haven't done I haven't done a full written review of it. So I'm kind of struggling with how to describe why I didn't enjoy this book as much as I thought I would. I did like the cultural references. I did like the characters. Zuri has Afro-Latino roots, which I absolutely love the cultural references to those roots. I love that it was about two black girls growing up in Brooklyn and, you know, repping basically for their hood, like, because I know that, I feel that, I connect with that on a personal basis because I have been there. But the Pride and Prejudice aspect almost didn't work. I think that's what I'm feeling, like the Pride and Prejudice aspect of it just didn't work. Like if this just was just a regular contemporary book that touched on gentrification with a contemporary romance in the background, almost how like the voting booth was about elections and voting rights and the black experience with the backdrop of a YA contemporary romance, I think this would have been better. I think the Pride and Prejudice element actually ruined it, because I've read Pride and Prejudice multiple times and this was so forced. Even the characters' names, like Darius Darcy, you know, like her sister's name is Janae, which is supposed to be like Jane, and then I think her best friend's name is Charlotte, which is supposed to be like Charlotte. It didn't need the Pride and Prejudice aspects. It really didn't. It didn't need the Pride and Prejudice aspects. I feel like that was tacked on as a way to sell this book, and it didn't work. I also feel like Ibi Zoboi could have done a better job talking about gentrification. I feel like it was just highlighted on throughout the book, but it really didn't come full circle into the end. And I feel like she had this hardcore focus on the Pride and Prejudice part, that the gentrification aspect of it kind of took a back seat until the very end of the novel. And then the end of the novel was like, it came out of left field almost. Like there was no build up to how gentrification was going to affect everyone in this book until it just happened at the end, and you're like, okay, well, where did that come from? Like there was no indication that this was even happening, that this was a possibility. Like when gentrification, this is not a spoiler, I'm trying to discuss it without doing spoilers. The only way that gentrification was really made apparent in this book was just like slight words about how the wealthy were moving into the lower income areas of these cities, and that you were starting to notice that communities that were typically black and brown, or predominantly black and brown, ended up now having a lot of white people in the mix. And that was it. So by the time we got to the end where gentrification was like this serious aspect of the book, I mean like the last 20 pages of the book, I was like, that came out of nowhere. That was not a build up. It's like she forgot that this book was about gentrification, and then remembered in the last part of the book that it was about gentrification. So I was like, dang. Yeah, it didn't work. So this, I was expecting so much more from this, and I didn't get it. So I only ended up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars, because I liked the story, I liked the characters. I just would have loved it without Pride and Prejudice, and if she would have actually discussed gentrification more. It wasn't a bad book, it just wasn't a good book either. I think I need to do a video about my rating system so you guys have an understanding of where I am with books that I give 3 stars. Books with 3 stars is kind of like, meh, I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, it is what it is. And that's exactly what Pride was for me. All right, y'all, so what I'm currently reading, some things that I think will be finished by the end of the month. I'm currently reading New Moon. I actually only have about an hour left of this. I'm going back and forth between physical and audio. I only have an hour of audio of this left, so I'm gonna finish this. By the time this video goes up, this will have been finished. I'm still in the middle of reading Skip Beat, which I hope to have finished very, very soon. I'm about 60 pages into Full Disclosure by Cameron Garrett, and I still need to start The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. So I have quite a few chunky things going on. I have some things that I need to finish up for a project that's going to go up on Friday of next week, so I will get a couple of those things read within the next couple of weeks. As always, if you guys like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications. All of my links are down in the description box below if you're looking for ways to support my channel, or if you just want to follow me on social media. All that will be down below. As always, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and let me know in the comments what you've read so far in July and what your favorite book of July has been. All right, y'all.